Hi there, my name is Arun Gupta. I'm from Amazon, and we are here at Devoxx Belgium. And I'm very excited today to have folks from Pivotal with me.
Yeah, so my name is Alberto. I'm a software engineer in Pivotal.
My name's Oliver Hughes. I'm also a software engineer at Pivotal.
Fantastic. So I learned that you gave the deep dive yesterday at Devoxx Belgium on Kubernetes Distilled.
Yes, we did.
Fantastic. So tell me, first of all, what you do at Pivotal.
Sorry, you go first.
Sure. So we develop tools for developers, right? So we work very closely with a platform called Cloud Foundry, and we have been working on building libraries, tools, and services for people who are running Spring apps in Cloud Foundry. So we decided to take a look into the Kubernetes world just to see what it looks like or how our products are going to be ported over there, because now we have to move them there. And because of that, we had a lot of learning to do, and we wanted to distill that for the people, and this is why we decided to give this talk.
And it has the name Kubernetes Distilled.
Exactly.
All right, and what do you do?
So in the last 6 months, I've been really focusing on the developer experience for Spring developers and how we can make their experience on Kubernetes better. So that's looking at new tooling that we might provide, or how we might improve the actual runtime itself and having a more native experience, and also a more better getting started experience. And that's really, for me, what motivated the talk, and having it as a distilled, Kubernetes distilled, yeah.
Fantastic, and I think that's very important because I've seen a lot of companies build a lot of tools, but if the on-ramp experience is not easy, then you lose the audience right there itself. So thank you for doing that, actually. And Pivotal is the company that is most associated with Spring Stack, which a lot of developers know already anyway. So tell me, what was sort of the essence of your Kubernetes Distilled talk?
So we wanted to provide a set of tools so that people can get from their code to actual production, right? So we give a lot of advice on the tooling they should be taking a look at, and gave them some trade-offs on what you would gain if you use a specific type of image, for example, or another kind of tooling.
And when you say code, you really mean Spring applications.
Exactly.
Primarily.
Yeah, so Spring applications from start.spring.io to actual production. That's the journey we went with.
Fantastic. So essentially, customers can go to start.spring.io, create their project over there, pick the manifest that they care about, that gives them a zip bundle. That's the experience that they already are aware of. What is the next step that they're doing? Because they don't know the Kubernetes journey. They may not be aware of what Kubernetes is. How do you explain them the basic concepts?
Yeah, so we started from that. So we downloaded an app, and we started walking the path by creating the Docker file manually. So we started, hey, this is Docker, this is a container, this is how you create a container. You just copy whatever you find on the internet. This is how you create a Docker file, and we see all the problems that can cause if you just copy that and don't think about them that much. And we then give some trade-offs on what images to use, right? Because by default, people just go with OpenJDK, but that's something that you should really consider not doing, right? Especially, first of all, using OpenJDK, and you could be using Alpine Slim, but that has some problems as well. You're using some, for example, cryptography libraries that can be problematic. And also, we consider the option of using distroless, right? Because you have a smaller surface attack, so it depends on the trade-off that we give people, right? And then we move from there to tooling like Jib, so that you don't have to think about that. All the layering is going to be done for you automatically, right? So you don't even have to go, like you have a FATJA, and you can unzip it, and then you have all the layers there, and you can copy them, but with Jib, all that is done for you. So then we go to the journey from Jib to what Kubernetes could look like.
So actually, let's step back for a second. Let's try to unpeel what Jib is. So tell me what Jib is.
Okay.
So really, it's I guess a plugin for both Gradle and Maven. For Java projects, you'll build your image without having to create a Docker file, and actually not even needing a daemon. So kind of a zero configuration experience. And in theory, you should be able to distribute your source code, run that build, and get an image as an artifact.
And why is it important that it is integrated into the Gradle and the Maven build plugin system, and no Docker file is required and no Docker registry is required? Why is that important aspect?
I guess that's the language developers speak for building, and it means they don't have to learn another kind of a DSL or something to be productive.
So they know Gradle DSL, they know Maven language, and it's just seamlessly integrated in there.
That's right.
And the problems that we were identifying with Dockerfile earlier, that there are so many best patterns to write a Docker file, they don't have to worry about it.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. Now, another advantage of Jib, as I understand, is how it creates different layers and it leverages the Docker file system. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, so you can manually go and the concept that what we deployed today is a jar file, right? That's a FATJA. But then, because the way Docker works is by using layers, right? So by default, you just take your FATJA and put it in the Docker file. That means that whatever you change it's going to try to re-upload the whole layer. But if you split that into different layers, the one that changed the most and the one that changed the less, that means that your experience is going to be much smoother, right? So now, if you split that up into 3 different copy commands that done manually, then that means that you change your classes. That means that you don't have to re-upload all your dependencies, right? So your development experience is going to be much smoother, especially because all the tools, they depend on that image being pushed and pulled. So that experience is going to be much more improved, and give that's by default, right? So
correct, and I think that's a very important aspect, particularly in a microservices world, where your jar is downloaded, and if it's only the incremental layers that needs to be downloaded, which is the classes layer, then it's going to be a lot more efficient, and hopefully less time to start up your microservice on a new node, particularly.
Exactly.
Okay, fantastic. So Jib is a recommended tool in terms of building your jar file, fat jar, in the right way using the right design pattern. What is sort of the next step then?
So I think really that's how you deploy your image onto Kubernetes. So, and one of the tools we've been a really big fan of is Skaffold, because it gives you like an end-to-end developer workflow, and it will integrate with things like Jib or even just plain Docker files, and it will do things in a really, give you some really sensible defaults. So creating images, tags for your images in a meaningful way, maybe based on sort of SHA or something. It will deploy that, publish that to a registry, and then and it will deploy that to Kubernetes, either using sort of kubectl or using Helm if you want as well. And it will sit there and watch for any changes to your code. So you can just let Skaffold run. It will sit there in the background, and it gives you this really seamless kind of developer experience.
So Skaffold is sort of running on my local machine,
that's right.
and gives me that local CI/CD experience that I'm looking for. And it integrates, you said, well with Jib anyway.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's very cool. Now, can I run Skaffold on the cloud, or would I be really using something more production quality? So help me understand that difference.
So for me, Skaffold is about the kind of, you've done all your code, you've written your tests, you just want to make sure it runs on Kubernetes before you kind of actually finish, say your kind of piece of work is finished, your story's finished, let's just validate things and make sure, test it on Minikube, and run some tests against it. At least that's how I would use it, and then have a proper CI/CD system that actually, deploys to a real cluster.
So it's a development tool in that sense, as you would recommend. Okay, very cool. Now, once you have done the Jib and the Skaffold, you need to be able to run Kubernetes on your desktop.
Yes.
What are my options for that?
So there are many. I mean, I would recommend not to run it in your desktop, to be honest, because you are going to face a lot of issues, especially around the networking area. So we always recommend using a development cluster. But for local, I have been a Mac user, and I have been using Kind. Like if you are on Linux, you can just use your K3s, for example, or Minikube being the most popular choice historically. So those are your local options. But I would always recommend using an actual development cluster, especially for debugging networking issues.
Correct. Well, as I understand, yes, you can run it on a local machine, but it's a single node cluster first of all. Even if you're running Minikube or K3s or whatever it is, single node cluster. And the important part is, Kubernetes, has so many different layers, particularly the CNI part that you were talking about, which is how the networking is done, and that is very different between the desktop environment and the cloud environment. So you really want to reduce the impedance mismatch between dev and the prod, essentially. To get it closer to that.
Yeah, the thing I found when I was working with load balancers and ingress, that was when I found I have to do quite a lot of different things locally, so it just was easier for me to use like a managed cloud provider service, and at least then I think kind of things are working in an expected way that I don't have to do any extra too much.
Yeah, you are as close as to be to production, right? You want to be closer to production, and by using a real development cluster, you're going to be there almost, right?
Right. So let's say you have a cluster up and running, in the cloud. You have a dev cluster, and you have a staging cluster, and you have a prod cluster. How do you migrate between these different environments?
So we have been recommending a tool called Customize, because it allows you to use something called overlays. So that means that you will create your deployment.yaml, however you want to generate it or create it, and then this file is going to be taken as a base, and it's never going to be touched, right? So you can apply overlays on top of it, saying, for example, for my development cluster, I want to use one replica, and I want to use a Spring profile called development, and then you will create a new folder with a new file, and say, hey, I want to use 5 replicas for production, and I want to use the profile production, and leaving the deployment untouched, right? But that's the important thing, so that now you can have different flavors, and you can just customize that by creating different folders and different customized files.
So essentially you have one base file in which the image and the basic attributes are mentioned, and then you have these different environment-specific files, and that's how you apply customize to it, and then target the right cluster.
Exactly. So now it is integrated with the kubectl CLI, so you can just say -k and apply your overlay on there.
And any particular version in which customize was introduced, and since when it's relevant?
Not really.
As I understand, I think it was integrated in kubectl in 1.14.
Okay.
So up until that, because it's a very typical Kubernetes way, it was built as part of a SIG project, and then it got integrated into the kubectl. It went through its own life cycle, and the tool is only available in 1.14 onwards. But that's good because we're right now in 1.16 time frame. Now, your advice to the developers, that the way you were giving it, was that specific to a Kubernetes version, or how was that along?
I think the overall advice was basically, if you're probably going to be using a fairly sort of recent version, and we were sort of kind of making sure people are going to be either using a recent Minikube or a recent cluster. I think there's always going to be that caveat, and we did sort of mention in the talk how you got to be careful with the kind of versions of APIs when you're creating your kind of deployments and things, because if things get, it might stop working if you use the wrong version, for example. So and that's just one of those things you really got to kind of be aware of what version am I sort of targeting. And
I think that's very important because you need to understand, how the APIs are versioned in Kubernetes. It's alpha, then it goes to beta, and within alpha it could have multiple V1, alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3. So it's important to understand that versioning scheme and how the APIs are evolved and what are you compatible with.
Yeah, and how long does it take to actually be live, right? Because, for example, you have a feature in alpha, it takes around 3 months to move to second alpha or to beta, and there's also a lag, right? So you are using a managed service, there's typically a lag between 3 and 6 months for that version to actually get there. So be very careful when reading the documentation, really, because you see this new feature and you get super excited about it. Say, oh, well, this is alpha. Maybe I cannot, even feature title it.
Yeah, because at Amazon EKS, for example, we only offer beta and the GA features. We don't offer alpha features because they are still evolving very rapidly. And that's one of the design features, so to say, of Kubernetes is that in alpha, they can break backwards compatibility. With beta, they don't try to. They don't have to, actually. Very cool. Tell me some of the tools that you guys have been working on recently for making Spring developers' life happy for Kubernetes.
Yeah, so there, we can't really sort of talk in too much detail yet because a lot of this stuff is actually not yet. We can't make kind of solid commitments. But what I will say is the next version of Spring Boot that we're going to try and create a much more native experience for Kubernetes. I mean, Spring Boot already has great support, and you can build your workloads and one really great in Spring Boot. But it's just going to get better.
A lot more native, more seamless, integrated, and all.
Yeah, and we're also looking at tools alongside Boot that might be used to supplement that experience and make it even easier for people to do things like create manifests.
And I presume that is specifically for Spring developers, not so much for any Java developer. Or would they be relevant for the Java developer?
So I think some of the stuff may be relevant to other Java developers, but I guess our Spring developers are always our kind of core audience for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Now, I think one of the topics that you also covered as part of your deep dive was sort of where Kubernetes is heading to. What's sort of coming up next? So talk to me more about that.
Yeah, so there are a few specifications, right? We had the CNAP specification, personal and bias forward.
So talk to me, what is CNAP?
So it is called Cloud Native Application Bundle, and it is an opinionated way to bundle your application so that it can be deployed to any cloud, theoretically, without any problem, right? So you completely separate how you bundle application and where it's going to be deployed in the end. So that spec is going to be around, it has been around for a bit, but personally I prefer Java build packs. I mean, build packs, cloud native build packs. Why? Because that...
Build pack is a Cloud Foundry specific terminology?
Not anymore, actually. So it was started by Heroku, and then there was a new foundation project created between Pivotal and Heroku. It is the core Cloud Foundry are build packs, and now, for example, on Knative you can also use build packs, but that's great because it says, hey, this is my source code, I don't know how, just put it into production. So it will have different phases, and it will say, discover first what your application is like. You say, okay, I can see a pom.xml, which is probably a Java app, or if it sees, some node dependencies, it will say, okay, this is a node app.
So it takes an opinionated approach accordingly.
Exactly. So that's how I think that the future may look like, right? We have a lot of success in Cloud Foundry with that. Heroku have a lot of success. Knative is going to that direction. So maybe the future may look something like that.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest selling points for me anyway for build packs is that you can get kind of these guarantees of security with it. So you could be able to say, okay, if there's any vulnerability for the JVM, for example, you can very quickly rebase that image and get the latest JVM. Same with your kind of OS underlying libraries and things. It has that ability to rebase those completely secure, curated sort of layers on top of it. So,
and that goes back to the point that we talked about in the very beginning, that what is the base image that you're using, and if that base image, whether it's distroless, whatever OpenJDK base image you're using, if that has a CVE, if you're using a build pack,
Yeah.
that'll really help you kind of clean it up rather
Exactly.
fast.
Yeah, there is a tool called KPAG, or this pack and then KPAG, and that helps you a lot with the triggers, right? Because today you say, okay, there's a new CVE, and maybe I'm using even a floating tag on my image. How do I know that I have to upgrade it? If I could have a vulnerability scan in some registry, but maybe you don't have it, or maybe you don't have an automatic trigger. With that CLI, you can actually rebase the layer that only needs to be rebased and automatically, and it takes very little time, right? Because there's only one specific layer that's going to be rebased. So the security is going to improve a lot in that regard.
Very cool, very cool. So I presume I understand that you're also going to giving this talk at other conferences as well?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so DevNexus in Atlanta. It's going to be a condensed version of the talk for, I think, for an hour. So and the other thing that we're going to sort of change from the feedback we got from this talk is have more live demos. So we're going to have a bit more focused and more live demos.
I think the developers always enjoy live demos.
Yeah,
I personally enjoyed live demos,
Yeah.
And particularly somebody like Josh Long, who does everything about beautiful testing,
Yeah.
is all about live demos.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he's very energetic in
Yeah,
that
yeah,
sense.
absolutely.
Live demos are that much harder, but that much more fun too.
Yeah,
So,
perfect.
fantastic. Any last bits of advice for developers who are starting their journey who are already Spring Boot developers and who are getting into the Kubernetes route? What would you guide them?
I would say that there is a lot of room for improvement, right? So whatever you're doing today, please continue and please give us feedback, right? Because we really want to improve the experience, like we and all the products that are around there. So just please open issues, tell us what you see, tell us what you would like to see, and let's open this conversation up so that we can create better tools, so you can come up with better tools.
Yeah, I think for me, it's worth learning some of the theory behind Kubernetes because once you understand that, I think all the pieces fall into place. So it's worth taking that little bit of time to understand the wider architecture for me, even as a developer.
Fantastic. I think that's very well put. So as they said very clearly, try to take your time to understand the basic Kubernetes concepts. There is a lot of scope to do, and it's a journey. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. So enjoy the journey. There's a lot to learn. Signing off from here, Arun Gupta. Thank you.